Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us as we delve into the State Library's Modern Maps collection. My name is Sarah Ryan, Senior Librarian in Victorian and Australian collections. Hello to those who are joining us via the live stream as well. On behalf of State Library Victoria, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional lands of all the Victorian Aboriginal clans and their cultural practices and knowledge systems. We recognise that our collections hold traditional cultural knowledge belonging to Indigenous communities in Victoria and around the country. We support communities to protect the integrity of this information gathered from their ancestors in the colonial period. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, who have handed down these systems of practice to each new generation for millennia. Maps reveal how people comprehend and interpret the world at a certain point in time. Each map maker imbues their work with an individual point of view. So a collection of maps offers a range of perspectives that can help us identify and better understand our own frame of reference. Tonight, we will hear from 4 guest speakers who have created unique modern maps, many of which now live in the library's collection. Melinda Clarke is the founder of City Maps Illustrated and has published bird's eye views of Melbourne and the Bellarine Peninsula. Miles Howard Wilkes is an artist whose recent work uses the metropolitan train lines to map a guide to the best snacks in Melbourne. Luciano is the co-creator of Queerways, a community arts initiative to map the queer cartography of Australia. And Adam Mattinson is a cartographer who produces Tolkien-style maps of the Yarra Ranges. Before we hear from these talented creators, I'd like to give you a taster of the library's extensive map collection. But first, a few quick housekeeping notes. Please switch your mobile phones to silent mode if you haven't already done so. You'll find the toilets to the right of this room. Please follow the signs. Following the presentations, we invite you to explore the collection items we have on display here tonight. You'll also be able to purchase a range of items from our guest speakers after the presentations. And a shout out to our friends at Reading's State Library who are joining us to help make this happen. Unfortunately, we won't have enough time to host a Q&A with our guests, but we encourage you to find them for a chat during the collection viewing and after the presentations have finished. We've been collecting maps for nearly 170 years. With well over 100,000 maps in the collection, it is amongst the most significant in Australia. Current retrospective maps published in and about Victoria are the primary focus, but Australian and international maps are also acquired to reflect our place in the wider national and global context. Popular maps for local and family historical research include county, parish and township plans produced by the Department of Crown Lands and Survey to document land purchases from 1837 onwards, auction plans produced by the real estate companies promoting land sales during the land boom of the 1880s, and drainage plans produced by the Melbourne Metropolitan Board of Works for the implementation of the city's sewerage system in 1890. Antique maps include the first outlines of the Australian coast, charts by Matthew Flinders, early Dutch maps, and 19th century maps of India. Cartography features prominently in Handmade Universe, the current exhibition in its final week at State Library Victoria, so I'd encourage you all to see it if you can. Artists and designers were commissioned to create works to be displayed as a contemporary counterpoint alongside historical items from the library's collection. It celebrates lesser-known stories, often of women who have made significant contributions to innovations in art, science and technology. The centrepiece is Stargazing, a giant knitted star map donated to the library's collection by artist and software engineer Sarah Spencer. She hacked a vintage knitting machine and developed a new computer algorithm to produce the work. It features an interactive LED light component designed to illuminate the 88 constellations in the southern and northern hemispheres. Mandy Nicholson, a First Nations Wurundjeri artist, created a mural painted on an open weave fabric that wraps around the walls of the gallery. The work, titled Darangok Bik in the Woiwurrung language, means star country in English. The diamonds depict ancestral being Bunjil, the wedge-tailed eagle, as the star Altair, with his wives on either side of him. The dreaming tracks tell the narrative of country and are represented by wavy lines in the centre that stretch the length of the design. The background shows the colours of the sun changing into the starry night sky. The bottom wave represents song lines that map country travelling through the smoke of fire. John Flamsteed's Celestial Atlas is considered the first comprehensive telescopic star catalogue. He founded the Greenwich Observatory and was the first astronomer royal, spending decades observing and making meticulous records of close to 3,000 stars. The atlas was published after his death in 1729, containing 28 maps of the major constellations visible from Greenwich. It enjoyed instant success, becoming the standard reference for professional astronomers for nearly a century. The library holds 2 copies, one thought to have belonged to James Cook. Appearing in the published catalogue of the library for 1854, the atlas was a very early acquisition to the collection. Joan Blau's new and most accurate tables of the whole Earth is a double hemispherical map published in 1664. It was revolutionary in its depiction of the Copernican solar system, with the Earth revolving around the sun. Blau was the first map maker to incorporate this theory into a world map. The work frames the world between the figures of Ptolemy and Copernicus, with allegorical representations of the planets and the seasons. It shows California as an island and incorporates the discoveries of Abel Tasman and incomplete outlines of Australia, New Guinea, and New Zealand. The items on display in Handmade Universe illustrate the breadth of the maps collection and its growing diversity through contemporary acquisitions. Further enriching the library's collection is the inspiring work of the local modern map makers showcased in tonight's Window On Collection's Modern Maps. Let's hear about the personal experiences that shape their craft and lie at the heart of their maps. I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, Melinda Clarke. She's the founder and producer of City Maps Illustrated and published her first Melbourne map in 1990. 25 years later, she returned to her love of creating detailed illustrated maps and together with a small team of artists produced the Melbourne map in 2018. She loves sharing stories of the process of completing each project and encouraging the next generation of map makers. Welcome, Melinda.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me. I feel really honoured to be here tonight. I'm an map maker and the story is actually really long, but I'm going to give you the 15-minute version tonight. So it all started back in the mid-80s when I was travelling around Europe and America, just backpacking as a young person does in their 20s. And I collected all these beautiful illustrated maps of cities that I visited and brought them back home. For me, an illustrated map made it much easier to get back to the place that you were staying or to the place you were visiting if you could see the buildings, and they were a great souvenir. So when I arrived home, I hunted around for a map of Melbourne, of my hometown. I thought surely there should be one. And at the time, the only one I could find was this 1880 map. It's a beautiful illustration by a fellow called A.C. Cook, and it was etched to go into one of the newspapers at the time to celebrate the opening of the exhibition buildings. There was another couple I found, one in 1934. So there were a few around, but nothing contemporary and the way I thought it should be represented. So I went back to school. I did a business plan course at Monash University and wrote the plan about this wonderful map and how I was going to market it, and met a whole lot of artists and auditioned them with my crazy idea. And I met this wonderful person called Deborah Young. So we started this journey together. We took 7,500 photographs of Melbourne, a lot of them from hot air balloons. You see 10 balloons going over Melbourne now. There was only one at that time. The fellow that owned that balloon was Chris Dewhurst, and I rang him up and said, we're doing this map of Melbourne, would you come and have a look at it? We're working from the garage at the back of my mum's house. So he came around, and from that point on, any time he had a spare spot in his tourist balloon, he'd call me up at 4 o'clock in the morning and say, you want to come along? And the answer was always yes. It was just extraordinary to see Melbourne from that point, but we had to take the photos with a 35mm camera, go back, develop them, and then use them for reference. And you never knew where you were going to fly with Chris. He didn't even know where he was going to fly until that morning. So the experience was fantastic. I went up 12 times. Here's Deborah and I in our little studio, which is the garage at the back of my mum's house. And we worked from there for about 3 years on this crazy project. I wanted to introduce you to Facebook in the 90s, so people would show their face to us in our little garage and they'd write in our book. And we had, during that process of the years of doing the map, just extraordinary support and encouragement to keep on going. So I ran out of money and it was taking a long time to finish, so I borrowed $50,000 from the bank. I took along that little business plan that I'd done a year or so ago, and they kindly gave me the money at $50,000 at 22.5% interest. And I found that document in amongst all the thousands of things that I've been collecting over the years. So finally, in 1990, we finished the line drawing and published a limited edition print, $250, and right in the same timing as the stock market crash. So it was a challenge to sell that map, but we sold enough. We went, approached some media, and we got some lovely articles written about us. We went on the radio. An overarching comment was, when is it going to be coloured? So that whole process was another 6 months, and two artists, Heather Potter and Mark Jackson, put those 7,000 photos back together from the sophisticated filing system that you can see on that screen, and coloured all the buildings. And what they didn't have reference of, they used to just jump on the train and come into Melbourne, take their own photo, and they coloured this. So the original is absolutely extraordinary. It's watercoloured. You can't make a mistake and fix it up. I look at that map a lot, and I'm still in awe of the work of Deborah and the colourists. So we sold a lot of those posters. Again, the magic of media that we discovered. The Age did a story. By this time I'm in debt about $80,000. And the Age put an article in their newspaper. And a couple of days later we went to the letterbox, and the condition of the Age using the map on the inside front cover was that they put our name and address and telephone number there, and that the map was $49.95. So, no, $39.95 back then, sorry. Anyway, a couple of days later we went to the post office, and there was a little ticket in our box and says, come to the front desk, and we brought home a sack of handwritten cheques. And then we fielded like tens of thousands of phone calls. We ended up by selling a lot of maps and paid back all the funds that we'd borrowed. Then we went on to make a jigsaw. So back then there was Australian jigsaw manufacturers. I thought that would be a good idea. We sold, 12,000 jigsaw puzzles, which was great. Cards, not so good. I still have quite a few of those in the garage. And there's some actually out the front. There's free to take away if you'd like. And then I moved down to the Bellarine and became an abalone farmer. So that's another story, we won't go into that. And I put all my maps, all my memorabilia, anything I had left over in that garden shed. And it sat in that garden shed for nearly 20 years. I'd been back and forth saying, clear it out. Went to clear it out one day and I thought, I wonder if anyone else has done a map of Melbourne, and they hadn't. So I taught myself this new beautiful language around the internet, and I happened to go past a bookshop and I saw this book, and I didn't read it, but the cover really spoke to me. And I bought the book secondhand and read a few pages, and then just went on and thought, right, we'll assemble the team and see if we can do this again. So Deborah wasn't in a position to draw it, and initially I thought, scan this, great new technology, just update a few buildings. Well, Melbourne has changed so much that that was impossible. So I met this wonderful artist, Lewis Brownlee. He lived in Geelong, and I was living on the Bellarine Peninsula at this time, so we got together and I said, yeah, I reckon you could do this map, and he said, yeah, no worries, 4 to 6 months. So he drafted up the different sections. We took thousands and thousands of photographs again, but this time we didn't have to pay every time we developed them, and drafted up in blue, then sectioned it up, and stickers everywhere, and just research. We'd come up to Melbourne, drive around the streets for a day or two, go back to this little studio that we had. And it was just a process that I'd been through before, but things had changed so much. And with the joy of technology is that you can get the information, but it's also a disadvantage because there's so much information, and what do you leave out? And clearly you don't want to leave anything out. So I was actually a bit of a stick with Lewis. He would draw a building. I said, I think that there's actually 3 windows there, not 2. And he said, no one will notice. And I was like, they will. And they did. And they do, but it's just part of the process of doing it. If you do it well and you put every effort into it, it comes back in spades. It did with the Melbourne map, the first one, and yeah. So this went on from the 4 to 6 months to. I think we were a year down the track. I'd taken a huge mortgage out on my house, and I'd run out of money again. So I thought, we better do some crowdfunding. So Lewis did that illustration on time-lapse. We put a crowdfunding plan together, and there's me, hand on heart, saying, we're doing this map of Melbourne. We'd really like you to come along. It'll be ready in 6 months. So that didn't happen, but I did gather a lot of people that had bought the first map and were so excited that we were doing it again, and it was just overwhelming, the support. So I just kept in contact with people. Lewis kept on drawing. Deborah was also illustrating. She did a lot of the character drawings, and we scanned the completed map. In the meantime, we did exhibitions. We got a shop in Collins Street. We were given that shop for 10 days, and I put Lewis in the front window, and he kept on drawing, and again we got a lot of feedback and made some sales. We just always seemed to be able to keep going. Finally finished it, combined the illustrations together, and in November 2018 we had this map finished. And this is my life again, back in Mum's garage, different house, but back in the garage, folding, rolling maps and sending them out. And then working with Sean Rodwell. Again, serendipity led us to Sean. He said, yeah, I can do that, probably 6 weeks. 6 months later, he finished the colouring, and we had this awesome map of Melbourne, and again, through the whole process of promoting, it's actually done really well. But we'd published that just in time for COVID. So luckily I'd been to New Zealand in 2018 and spoken to some manufacturers over there because there was none in Australia, and I found this little family company. I said, can you make jigsaw puzzles for me? Yeah, no worries. Got a container in, and it just went nuts. So thanks to Scott Morrison, who said jigsaws are essential, and Melbourne in lockdown, and I ended up by bringing 4 containers of jigsaws in, and again that paid back all the debts and allowed us to work on some new projects, and that was my life in a bigger shed, not my mum's garage anymore, but in the jigsaw also kept a whole lot of people employed through COVID, packing and sending. So thank you if any of you did buy that jigsaw puzzle, and sorry, not sorry, how hard it is to do. So I said to Deborah, right, you can't go out and work, we've got a little bit more time, let's get onto this Bellarine map, which we had kind of started. So that was another labour of love. It was just like going back to my 20s again with Deborah, and we just had the best time documenting the Bellarine Peninsula. That again was finally finished, over budget, over time, but that's just the nature of the maps. And really, it's not a really sensible business decision to get into this kind of map making, but we're all passionate about what we do, and in the end, it all works out. Sean again did the colouring, and he lives in Port Arlington, and he looks over the waters of the Bellarine, so he was able to really make it true to life, except he didn't get the canola fields quite right. He was drawing all these, yellow paddocks, and I'm like, why are you putting a canola field there? He said, it looks good. I said, that farmer has cows. He doesn't have canola, and I'm going to meet him in the street down in Bellarine, and he's going to tell me, what are you putting canola in my paddocks for? So everything we did, just had to have that extra bit of detail. And then it's more enjoyable for people when they have it on their wall. So we completed that in November 21, and I'm back to map hustling. So I sort of go between map making and then map hustling, producing beautiful products, all Australian made. We can get our jigsaws made in Australia now. We do the prints on beach towels and tea towels and cards, but just short runs of those. But just my purpose in life now, I feel, is just I like to share the story. There's a lot more to it, but I want to encourage the next generation of map makers. And I'm really so pleased that the library holds our works, and maybe in another 100 years there'll be another crazy person like me that will sort of instigate this, and I really hope they do. Maybe I'll write a book, I don't know. Happy to talk to you afterwards. I've just got the 1 minute wind up. I'm really pleased that I got that into 15 minutes. And I hope you got a little bit from that. Feel free to talk to me afterwards. And thank you again if you have supported our map making adventures. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Melinda, for sharing your story. Really interesting to see that transition from analogue to digital, but always the strength behind both is the human element. Now I'd like to screen a short video about Miles Howard Wilkes. Miles is a multidisciplinary artist specialising in painting, ceramics, photography and digital art. Thematically, his practice is distinctly Australian, featuring landscapes and seascapes with recurring motifs of iconic animals, landmarks and transport. While the imagery in 2D work often combines several themes in one complex vision, Miles is singular in his focus, creating detailed compositions with character and elegance that feature trams, magpies, and reptiles, including their eggs and bones. This video was produced by Arts Project Australia, a creative social enterprise that supports artists with intellectual disabilities, promotes their work, and advocates for their inclusion in contemporary art practice. Arts Project Australia offers creative and accessible studio spaces for artists and a gallery to exhibit their work. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Miles and representatives of Arts Project Australia who are with us in the audience this evening.
How long have you been at Arts Project, Miles?
I started here 2000.
And apart from these beautiful paintings that you do, what else do you do at Arts Project?
I do ceramics, scenes, animation and photography.
Wonderful. In the map, in the picture, and in Melbourne, what are they building at the moment?
The metro tunnel.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It connects to the southeastern suburbs and the western suburbs as well too.
And can you tell us about the outer rail line here?
The suburban rail loop.
So that hasn't been built yet?
No.
It's pretty excellent that you've done a map of the future.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about some of the people that you've pictured here in the map?
Through them in sunshine, went to the movies and having food in the food court and looking in the clothes store. And another one's having pizza and coffee. And another person having coffee and donuts with a magpie watching. And that little girl and person looks like it's going to the footy with a magpie flying beside it. And people riding the trains up in Eltham. Person having coffee and the croissant. And someone's having duck and rice and green tea.
So there's a lot of food in the picture and there's a lot of people enjoying food.
Yeah.
Is that one of the reasons you like to travel to different places on the train to have the food and drinks?
Yeah.
So apart from food, one of the things you love about Melbourne is the sporting teams as well.
Yeah. Collingwood in the AFL and Melbourne Storm in the NRL.
Wonderful. Tell us about the iconic magpie reference that crops up in your pictures and all of your other artwork.
It represents my footy team, Collingwood.
There always is one in the pictures?
Yeah.
As you make your artwork without using reference material, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, because I usually come out with an idea, come out of my imagination.
That's pretty amazing, Miles.
Yeah.
Are you pretty pleased that the State Library have chosen it?
Yeah. That's where I had my hoarding there one time too. I was selected to be on the construction site of the State Library station a couple of years ago. And everybody came and had a look.
It was a great day, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And what happened when the hoarding was taken down, Miles, with the work?
On our backyards now.
Oh, you've got it in your back garden?
Yeah.
And some of it was also made into
Handbags.
Yeah.
And
for people walking around with tote bags with your beautiful work on there.
yeah.
This map seems to represent you and your life very much. It's about the things that you enjoy about Melbourne. Of all the food destinations here, which is your favourite one?
And the one with the Chinese Singapore noodles there too.
Very good. It's making me hungry. Yeah.
Thank you, Miles. What an imagination, but such an authentic representation of the city in which we live. Thank you to Miles and Arts Project Australia for creating a fantastic video that gives us a personal insight into your art, Miles, and studio practice. Our next speaker is Luciano. Luciano is a Melbourne-based arts educator and multidisciplinary artist. In collaboration with George Keats and the Australian Queer Archives, he established Queerways, a community arts initiative to map the queer cartography of Australia. Please welcome Luciano.
Good evening. First, I'd like to acknowledge that I live and work on the lands of the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I acknowledge them as the traditional custodians of the land and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend those respects to the Wurundjeri people of the land we meet on tonight, and extend that to all of the lands that people are joining us from digitally. God, that was a sentence. My name is Luciano. I'm a queer multidisciplinary artist. My arts practice primarily focuses on me working with marginalised communities to record and share their stories in accessible ways. One of the ways that I've done this, an initiative that I've co-developed with George Keats, my creative partner, is Queerways, retracing queer footprints. So this project was developed with the support of the Australian Queer Archives, who we wouldn't have been able to do the project without. They're a volunteer-run organisation that rely on donations, and they collect all of the queer history from around Australia from 1978 until today. I should say the records go further than 1978, but they started in 1978. Queerways was established by George and I as a way to connect queer people who were struggling with isolation in lockdown. We felt that the queer people around us were feeling isolated from community sites and physical locations where they're able to be their true selves. Although we view home as a way as a safe space and as a shelter from the outside world, that's not the case for all queer people. Some queer people aren't out in their domestic settings or are not able to realise their whole personality at home. And so, although COVID was difficult for everyone, it was particularly difficult for queer people who are able to realise their full personality and identity in these community spaces, which are very much driven by physical connection to that location, and it's only within that physical location where they can let down all their guards and be their true selves. We wanted to develop something that connected queer people back to these physical locations and to these community groups where they felt that they could be themselves and felt represented and heard. We wanted to make sure that people were more comfortable in lockdown and still had these connections, particularly as we face the closure of a lot of queer venues in Australia, which goes hand in hand with the liberation that some parts of the LGBTQA+ community are experiencing, but has the negative impact of people who can't be their true selves at home, no longer have a place to go to meet people like them. We also were inspired to focus on Melbourne and Melbourne's queer history because there's a lack of knowledge about the queer history of our city. This is due to a couple different things, primarily the criminalisation of homosexuality until the 80s in Victoria, and the fact that many, as a result of those laws, and landlords not wanting to lease to queer people, a lot of the venues and queer spaces that community was able to lease were only able to be there for 2 or 3 years before having to move on to other locations. Fickleness of the queer community also plays a point in that story, but the queer history of the different buildings in our city are just not known because of that short tenancy, and the queer community was spread out within the general population of our city. So we wanted to raise awareness of the contributions of the queer people of the past who've contributed to the development of the city that we now all are in today, and counteract the silencing of their histories that happened, and acknowledge them for all the work that they put into the liberation that some parts of the LGBTQA+ community experience today. We primarily focused on Melbourne because it gave a level of anonymity for queer people to come to the city and feel comfortable meeting other queer people. So people from outer regional areas and metropolitan areas of our city as well, to come to the women's gyms and gentlemen's bars and camp cafes of entrepreneurs like Vera Eastwood, to find people like them and find out that they weren't the only person in the world that felt that way, and that who they were and what they felt was actually normal. The City of Melbourne still plays that meeting place role for the queer community, but in a lot more of a celebratory way. We have queer venues throughout our city. There's constant queer landmarks being developed in our city that are outside of queer venues, which we've collected on our map. We have Midsummer Festival with the Carnival Pride March, Victoria's Pride, and the Melbourne Queer Film Festival as well. So we thought there was a lot of locations, a real breadth of experience that we could chart in a map, and combine both historical and contemporary stories together so people could get a full view of the queer experience of Melbourne. So we started by developing an anonymous submission platform on our website. This had to be anonymous because we wanted people who weren't out to still feel comfortable contributing stories. We also wanted to make sure that the stories that were in our map represented the whole spectrum of the queer experience, and some stories are very, very personal. So we wanted to make sure that people felt they could contribute but weren't identifiable. We did ask people to indicate their sexual, gender, cultural identities so that we were able to ensure that our map represented the whole of the queer community, and where there were shortcomings in the stories contributed, we reached out to different community groups and different academics to contribute stories in their place. So we categorised all the different community consultation stories and collated that data in a Google My Map on our website. That map's still publicly accessible and people can continue to add stories to that map. And the stories categories, varied from love, nightlife, health, crime, community spaces, the whole spectrum of queer experience. And simultaneously, we worked with the Australian Queer Archives to map historical stories to ensure that people were able to understand contemporary queer experience and historical queer experience at the same time. We also hoped that with the historical and contemporary stories, we were able to develop that acknowledgement for the queer people who contributed to the development of our city in the past, but people were able to connect to the feeling of the different stories. Whether historical or contemporary, we found that there was a general feeling or vibe within the stories of isolation and feeling different, and so a major part of queer experience was that feeling of being other. And we wanted to make sure that people were able to connect to that within the different stories that they read through, and understand that queer people were always in our city, always developing our city, contributing to the city that we live in today, and that even back then they felt that they didn't fit in the same way that people feel that way today, although at a smaller amount, hopefully. We had a lot of interest in our project, and thankfully media, queer media and queer aligned media like Joy FM, 3CR and Triple R invited us onto their shows to talk about our project within their programming and invite people to contribute to the maps. We also found that there was this big movement within Facebook community groups to come together and plan out how they were going to represent their group and accurately record their history within the map so that they were properly represented. So this was one message in a Facebook group. And this really made us feel like we achieved that goal of connecting people in lockdown, because people divided out the roles, like you're going to be the scribe and you're going to find the locations on the map so we can mark them accurately. And it was lovely to see all these different groups of people coming together to record their stories. Once we were done with the community consultation, we moved into actually illustrating the map. We were heavily inspired by the Melways map book, and we knew that just from the volume stories that we received, we were going to have to break the map into smaller sections, sort of like pages in the Melways. We also wanted to queer mapping in a way that people could recognise as being a part of queer identity. And so we referenced hanky codes or flagging, which is a non-verbal form of communication that some groups within the LGBTQA+ community use to indicate sexual preference and position preference. And although that communication form isn't very common anymore and always leads to funny situations at parties when young people don't recognise what the bandana they're wearing means, it's something that's like very clearly a part of queer identity that we wanted to make sure was present in the visual language of our maps. Our main focus when we were illustrating was accessibility. So we wanted to make sure that historical representations properly referenced historical data where possible. Not all of the stories had visuals. We also wanted to make sure that we brought to life the archive materials that we were accessing from the Australian Queer Archives. So each of the maps are voiced by a different community member. There's closed captioning to ensure access for all people, and there's guiding animations that take you through the map so you know where to look and what story's being explained. These are the community voices that voice the different maps. They gave their time for this photo shoot and the recording of the audio, and they're each wearing a bandana of the map that they voiced. We do actually sell these bandanas. We have a limited edition run that we've produced to raise funds for the Australian Queer Archives. 20% of all sales go to the Australian Queer Archives from the sale of the bandanas, and they're all made and sewn in Melbourne. Once we were finished with illustrating the maps, we were able to present them at the Victorian Pride Centre. This was the first public opening of the Pride Centre after COVID. It was a very overwhelming experience being in such a large space with so many people after being in lockdown for so long. But we found that the project was actually overwhelming for the people viewing the maps more so, particularly older communities, mature queer people who faced things like criminalisation of their entire identity were able to gather in a community in a space, the first purpose-built LGBTQA+ centre in Australia, and see themselves and represented in an artwork. And like feel recognised. It sort of made up for the experiences of their past, and a lot of people wanted to connect to show the artwork to people that were no longer with us, that they wish could have seen the artwork. Since then, we've also developed this mural for the 40th anniversary of the decriminalisation of homosexuality in Victoria, which is on the corner of Little Smith Street and Gertrude Street in Fitzroy, or Evie's Bar. The mural is a jumping off point for 3 audio walking tours that we produced of the city of Yarra that take you through the East, the West and Fairfield Infectious Diseases Hospital, which is the main treatment site for HIV and which was the main treatment site for HIV and AIDS in Victoria. We were awarded a Victorian Community History Award by the Office of Victoria and the Victorian Historical Society for this project, and this project was made possible through the support of Midsummer for Melbourne Pride, the Victorian State Government and various departments of the City of Yarra. We also have a temporary mural in St Kilda on St Kilda Pier. This gives an overview of the queer experience of St Kilda across a couple different decades, and here it is modelled by Cerulean, the voice of the map. And 2 weekends ago, I think, we presented a regional version of the augmented reality maps we produced for Victoria's Pride, a partnership between Midsummer and the State Government of Victoria to ensure equal representation of queer people around our state in the celebrations. So we mapped the queer histories of Wodonga, Mildura and Daylesford, And again, they're all augmented reality and voiced by different community members. We're currently looking at, much like the framed works here tonight, we have framed versions of these we'll be taking to those regional communities so that the stories are back within their original location. So if you have any suggestions of places where we could exhibit them, please let us know. And tonight I just want to finish on, I guess, the main focus of our project, which was by retracing queer footprints, we can step into a future where all our histories are celebrated and acknowledged. Maps are a really powerful tool at grouping people together when they're making them together, but they're also a really wonderful tool at letting people into someone else's experience and how they view the world. We've found through our maps that young people are interested in them to see what they missed out on and also learn about the queer history of our city, which from our documented record started in 1856. Well, it was first documented in 1856, I should say. But the project has really shown that recognition of the queer experience of our city for those mature queer people was really significant and is now our driving force to continue to map the queer experiences of our country. So we encourage everyone, if you feel that you could develop some sort of map with people to help them feel represented, to do so, because then we can understand all people's experiences of all locations. Thank you.
Thank you, Luciano. What a great platform for the queer community to share their stories and experiences, and also to educate the broader community. Our final speaker is Adam Mattinson. Adam is a cartographer, spatial data analyst, and self-confessed all-around map nerd. Exploring cartography over the last few decades, his maps challenge the perception of known geography by turning the Yarra Ranges into a Hobbit's Shire map in one realm, and in another, imagining a Melbourne where every tram and train proposal got the green light. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you, and we're going to talk nerdy for 15 minutes, so I hope you're excited for that. More on that guy later, but first I want to take you back in time just a smidge to around 393 million years ago. And I don't want to alarm you, but we're pretty close to a volcano, so it hasn't erupted in a while, so the last time it did erupt was 393 million years ago. But as a result of that, lava flows created these mountains and hills, and then Yarra River, then known as Bellarine, was flowing through there, and with the Great Dividing Range in the north and east, it created the area we now know as Yarra Ranges. Around 40,000 to 30,000 years ago, this is when the people of the Woiwurrung or Wurundjeri Nation occupied this area, and this is the area that I cover in my map. I also acknowledge that to the south, the Boonwurrung or Bunurong Nation is also there, and to the north, the Tanarong Nation as well. And before we knew it as the Dandenong Ranges, they called it Corran Warrable. And around that time, we had swampy riparian woodland around the rivers and creeks, and we had cool temperate rainforest around the mountain areas. Fast forward just a few millennia, and around 1830s, the British settlement of Port Phillip was established. The same lava flows that created rich volcanic soil was used to grow fruit. The same towering mountain ash outside of Hillsville was harvested for timber, and road and rail extended out east, and little villages began to dot that area. And then we're going to fast forward a few decades after that, and this very comforting image to me, which is Melways Edition 3, map 120. And we're looking at a spot here, which is the car park to Mount Evelyn SSW 92. And if you were around that time, you would have seen this weird looking kid being bored in the back of a Mitsubishi Pajero looking through that Melways. And just want to take this moment to acknowledge just how pivotal the Melways street directory is in the fabric of Melbourne as well. So if you didn't know, it's actually internationally, from a cartographic perspective, awarded as well. So we're quite lucky that we live in a city that has probably the best street directory in the world. And let's fast forward again. Spoiler alert, that kid ended up being me. And I should probably take this opportunity now to mention at some point between 1992 and 2023, I also studied geomatics, which has elements of cartography at RMIT, just around there. And if anyone out here in the crowd is interested in maps, please look into that course, because there are heaps of jobs right now in that field. So for the next 11 minutes or so, I'm going to be talking about this map in the background, which is my Yarra Ranges Tolkien style map, and how it was made, but more importantly, why. And to that I present this Spot the Difference competition. We have Gandalf walking around the Shire on the left-hand side, and then we have a beautiful photo from Woolwich Lookout in Melinda on the other side. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in this area and used to hike those hills when I was younger and read the books when I was younger, and there was just a natural comparison for me. Now we're going to go back in time a little bit, August 2017, and I decided to start drawing this map, sort of. The first version existed in 2002, and poor Miss Wallace, my Year 12 English teacher, had no idea that instead of studying English, I was drawing a map in my exercise book. So I didn't do very well in that class, but I ended up with a fairly complete Tolkien-style map that existed in my English textbook. I don't know where that is now, but version 2, which is the map that you'll see just over there, started in August 2017 when I got half price a Wacom tablet, which is basically a digital drawing pad. It works essentially like a piece of paper with a stylus that's used as a pencil. When I started drawing this to recreate the old version that I made in high school, I had no end plan whatsoever. I just started drawing because it's a really good release. The job that I had at that time, although there were cartographic elements, there weren't enough to satisfy my need to draw. So this is what I did in my spare time. As I started drawing it, elements of geofiction started popping up. What is geofiction? Geofiction is essentially fiction mixed with geography. And these are other versions or elements of geofiction that I've created in maps over the last few years. So it's basically like a version of real life where something along the line has changed. So we've got our boring version of reality and then a fun version of reality, which is represented in geofiction. So in some of my maps, that could be decades of rail funding. In another one, it could be if Yarra River never flooded Port Phillip, which happened in the last ice age around 10,000 years ago, I think. Or if hobbits lived in the Yarra Ranges. And we're in a library, so let's very quickly talk about The Lord of the Rings. Who's read it? How awesome is it? So that map in the preface of Lord of the Rings is so crucial when you're flipping through the book. You're reading about them being at Weathertop or at Rivendell or going down the Anduin River. Being able to flip between that page, which is like in the 5th or 6th page, and then back to the text is so crucial in understanding the story and how it unfolds. The extended editions of the film are very cool. But also, if you haven't heard it, the 1981 BBC radio drama as well. And they have an awesome soundtrack that follows that. And that is a picture of me with a record, which is the soundtrack of that. And that was instrumental, just popping it on the background while I just drew away. So what would hobbits in the Yarra Ranges look like? So my version, we've got rangers, ents, elves, dwarves, and dragons. So Puffing Billy, which is a steam engine, now becomes Puffing Billy the Dragon. There's a second dragon in the map as well, which you'll have to look for as well. All the mining activity that has existed in the Yarra Ranges is now occupied by the dwarves, so I had to learn how to convert some text into some dwarvish runes. The area around Black Spur, which is absolutely beautiful, just seemed naturally to me to be occupied by ents and elves. So some of the areas there I've translated into Tengwa, which is the Elvish language in Tolkien's books. And that extends also into the Murrindindi Shire, which has Marysville. And if you've been to Marysville before, it feels very, very Rivendell-ish, like it's very autumnal, waterfalls in valleys and that kind of thing. So it was actually really cool just sort of getting into that mind frame and creating a version of the place that I grew up that was a bit more fantastical. Because that was sort of, in my head, that's where I was as a kid. And to get it out on sort of a piece of paper was such a very amazingly artistic experience for me. It's not committed to memory, even though I lived in that area for 20 odd years and hiked around those hills during my spare time. So it was combined through a different number of sources. So having the moways by my side, using aerial imagery as well to see where current vegetation is. Open source mapping as well was really great for some of the more hidden trails. And the ecological vegetation class, which I actually use in my real life as a spatial data analyst, to see what the vegetation was like pre-European settlement was really cool as well. So if you look at my map and you see a swamp and you wonder why that might be there, it's because that existed before it was drained out for farming. Also using the Victorian Heritage Inventory and the Victorian Heritage Register and National Trust as well to look at some of the old tourist buildings that existed on the Dandenong Ranges as well. So anytime there's a historic building, that's included in the map as well. If you look at that image as well, some really cool pubs in the area as well. And the level of detail that I had as well, you can see at Woolwich Lookout, those poplars that exist there are there too. And that's the thing, when I started, I didn't really have an end point, but the scale that I'd committed to at the start, I had to keep going throughout the entire map. And if anyone knows the size of Yarra Ranges LGA, I think it's comparable to Luxembourg or something like that. So I committed to it and I just kept drawing. So because I committed to that grand scale, all these little things get included. So orchards, the type of fruit they grow there. There's some Easter eggs in there as well. So those wineries with the grape symbols. And anytime there's a race course, I converted that to some stables because that's a lot nicer. And the symbology that's used to represent those vines and that horse is a part of the Shire of Lilydale logo from pre-Shire amalgamation. So there's a few like historical nods in there as well. Natural features like Britannia Creek Cave, which is just outside Warburton as well. Lots of little things, but when you get close, you'll see. So at the moment, this version that I have here, it's the western half. There is a plan for me to finish it entirely to the eastern half. Everything east of Warburton and Marysville, if you cut a line there are only a handful of towns, so it's going to be me drawing a lot of trees and a lot of mountain ranges and a lot of rivers. I too have converted it into a jigsaw puzzle. Also, sorry, not sorry. It is, from what I've heard, hard. When I did it, it's because I'd been working on it for 4 years, so I kind of knew where everything was. And it's also been converted into a mural at Emerald Library as well. So they asked me to have that bottom end of the map as part of their mural and just to flesh out a bit of the Emerald side. This is a severely reduced version of the map. If you printed it out without reducing it, it would probably be 2 meters tall and 1.5 meters long. So when the eastern side gets done as well, it will be about 4 meters long. So it's all done on a software package called CorelDRAW. One of the challenges is that there are so many elements on this map that it just clunks. It's very, very slow. But I have found a way around that. And the other challenge is that this is all done in my spare time. So if there are any wealthy benefactors out there that want to support me and get me off the 40-hour week, that would be absolutely great. The plan is to finish in the next 3 years with the eastern half. While I work on other maps, there are some maps over there as well you'll see as well. But when it is finished, I'll keep you all posted and we'll have a big party. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I think people will be banging down your door for the eastern half of the Yarra Ranges map. It was really interesting to see that comparison of true representation of the environment with that element of the fantastical. Great. What a celebration tonight has been of identity and culture through creative expression to our connection to place. That brings us to the end of tonight's presentations. Please join me in thanking our guests, Melinda Clarke, Miles Howard Wilkes, Luciano, and Adam Mattinson, for sharing their modern maps with us. This event is part of a quarterly series of programs that give you a glimpse of what we're collecting at the State Library and why. You'll be able to find more details about future Window on Collections events via our website at www.slv.vic.gov.au. Thank you very much for joining us at State Library Victoria, and please enjoy exploring some of our collection items which are on display tonight. Thank you.